Jonah is a book in the Old Testament of the Bible, and it is believed to have been written by Jonah. And this is the great fish story. Even people that are not familiar with the Bible often know, kind of the story of Jonah, or at least they know that Jonah was swallowed by a great fish. Often it is thought by a whale, and he spends some time in that whale, contemplating and praying that God would release him from its stomach or wherever he was being held within the great fish. Jonah's one of the more famous stories from the Old Testament of the Bible. It's only 3 pages long, but it's really, really interesting. A lot of the books towards the end of the Old Testament, for me anyways, have been extremely repetitive. But Jonah was a bit different. Jonah was like, hey, this is a different, this is a legitimately interesting story to read and really think about, because there are some lessons that can be derived from it that I think are, very valuable. And so, overall, I really enjoyed the book of Jonah. I mean, it's a fascinating tale, very fantastical. There's a lot of debate, as to whether or not it's a literal story or a figurative story, some sort of helpful metaphor. I don't know. I'm not going to make any claims here. All I know is that, it's only 3 pages long, so a lot of details are left out. But the message of the story, whether, it's coming from a metaphorical story or a literal story, is still profound no matter what. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's please jump into the analysis of the different passages within the book of Jonah, and just the ideas within the book of Jonah that I found to be particularly powerful. So since there's only 4 chapters, I think we might as well just discuss each chapter. So Jonah Chapter 1 I found to be really interesting, because Jonah is just basically like God is calling him to go, preach and prophesy to the Ninevites, who are not Jews, and Jonah's like, yeah, not doing that. He flees from the Lord. He gets on a ship, and he, basically just tries to flee his calling. Of course, God does not like this, and so he, sends a great storm, and, all the other people that are on the boat with Jonah are like, what's happening? What's happening? They go to Jonah, like, do you know why this is happening? And Jonah's like, yeah, it's because of me. In fact, the only way that you guys are going to survive this situation is if you throw me off the ship. And the sailors are like, no, we don't want to do that. But it becomes very apparent, that all of their efforts are not going to succeed as far as getting through the storm. And so they're like, God, please don't punish us for killing Jonah. But hey, Jonah, we got to get rid of you, just like you said. And so they do get rid of him. And that's kind of like the big, situation in chapter 1. But it ends with, of course, after Jonah has been thrown overboard, he is swallowed by the great fish. And I just think chapter 1, there's a couple things that you can take from that. Number 1, don't flee from your purpose in life. If God is calling you to do something, or that there's something that you can do that is great in the world, and you don't do it, then that is a problem. You should not flee. You should run towards that goal, or whether there's adversity or not. And so that's something that I got from it, because otherwise you might get swallowed by a great fish. I mean, you probably won't, but you get the point. Don't run away from what you're called to do in this life, or you will suffer certain consequences. And the other thing I got from chapter 1 was that, the sailors were like, they were good guys. I was reading that, I was like, yeah, they legit did not want to, throw this dude overboard. And so it's just like, I guess the moral from that idea is just, whenever you're confronted with something, don't be afraid to question its validity, because it might actually be insane, or it might be totally sane. And the sailors obviously were like, Jonah, you're insane. We're not going to throw you overboard. But then they came around to realizing that, no, Jonah was actually telling the truth. And so that element of curiosity and that willingness to question commands from people who claim to, be getting these commands from God is a healthy thing to to possess, that curiosity, that skepticism. And it's also healthy for you to realize that, at a certain point, the person who may appear to be crazy at first actually was not the crazy one, and that you need to do what they're saying. Now we come to Jonah Chapter 2. And Jonah Chapter 2 I'd actually like to read in its entirety. It's very short, and then I'd like to discuss it. So without further ado, let's do that. From inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. He said, "In my distress I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From the depths of the grave I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the deep, into the very heart of the seas, and the current swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again toward your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever. But you brought my life up from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. Those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. But I, with a song of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will make good. Salvation comes from the Lord." And the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. So there's lots of things to discuss here, obviously. Verses 1 through 6, just beautiful, kind of like very potent language is used in its description. From the depths of the grave I called for help, because Jonah realized, you're in the belly of a great fish. You might as well be in the depths of a grave. And there's just so much language within these first 6 verses that I don't know, it was just very, me being the person that I am who just loves, interesting writing. This was very rewarding for me to read. But when you come to verse 7, where it says, "When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple." What I take from this, and others have said this, is Jonah, his life, at least the story of him going into the whale, is really analogous to the story of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, every single time, you see it throughout the Bible, they abandon God and then they just collapse. And as their life is ebbing away, then they turn to the Lord and the Lord saves them. And this is precisely what happened with Jonah whenever he was swallowed by the great fish. As his life was ebbing away, he remembered the Lord and his prayer rose to the Lord, to the Lord's holy temple. And, in verse 8, it even says, "Those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. But I, with a song of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you." This is verse 9. "What I have vowed, I will make good. Salvation comes from the Lord." This, again, I also see as analogous to, the story of Israel. Because it's like those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. Jonah's idol was, freedom from responsibility. And he was clinging to that, and it led to his destruction. Likewise, Israel, their, clinging to worthless idols is, quite literally idols, both of the mind and of just actual physical objects. But the point that Jonah's making, or the book of Jonah is making, is that yes, humanity, we can't get along without God. The moment we think that we can is the moment we descend into madness. It is our duty to, with a song of thanksgiving, sacrifice to the Lord. Jonah's sacrifice was, he was sacrificing his personal comfort to, carry out the Lord's command by preaching to the Ninevites, which he, of course, does. And, of course, the sacrifice, we all have similar sacrifices in our lives. I see it as, a chapter that is very relatable to the human condition and just to the condition and nature of civilizations and the way they rise and fall as a whole. Now, chapter 3 is where Jonah goes and preaches to the Ninevites, like, hey guys, you need to stop what you're doing, otherwise God is going to destroy you guys. The Ninevites listen to Jonah, they stop what they're doing, they put sackcloth on, they just kind of like sit in the presence of the Lord, surrender, they depart from their wayward ways, and the Ninevites are saved. And, you would think that all is well, but then you come to chapter 4, and Jonah is actually very pissed off about the fact that the Ninevites were forgiven. I'm going to read chapter 4, and then we will discuss. But Jonah was greatly displeased and became angry. He prayed to the Lord, "O Lord, is this not what I said when I was still at home? That is why I was so quick to flee to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live." But the Lord replied, "Have you any right to be angry?" Jonah went out and sat down at a place east of the city. There he made himself a shelter, sat in its shade, and waited to see what would happen to the city. Then the Lord God provided a vine and made it grow up over Jonah to give shade for his head to ease his discomfort, and Jonah was very happy about the vine. But at dawn the next day God provided a worm, which chewed the vine so that it withered. When the sun rose, God provided a scorching east wind, and the sun blazed on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. He wanted to die and said, "It would be better for me to die than to live." But God said to Jonah, "Do you have any right to be angry about the vine?" "I do," he said. "I am angry enough to die." But the Lord said, "You have been concerned about this vine, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight. But Nineveh has more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and many cattle as well. Should I not be concerned about that great city?" This is the best chapter in the entire book of Jonah, because what you see here is Jonah, first of all, he has a certain level of prejudice against the Ninevites. He is not happy that God, intervened for them, since they were not a part of God's holy people. So, you could say that Jonah was an exclusionist, he was prejudiced against the Ninevites, and he was pissed off that God would help these people that were not like Jonah, and he was ridiculous. And of course God's like, what? Do you have any right to be angry? And Jonah's just like, he takes a seat, wants to see if God will change his mind, do something about the city. And instead what God does, and this is where this chapter gets really interesting, is he grows a vine that really, shades Jonah, makes him feel comfortable. And Jonah's like super happy about it. He's like, yeah, this is my kind of vine. But then God sends a worm and the vine is destroyed. And Jonah at this point is like so pissed off. He's like, "Golly, God, just kill me." And God's like, "Wait, do you have any right to be angry about the vine?" "I do," he said. "I am angry enough to die," and I'm getting to the point, trust me. But the Lord said, "You have been concerned about this vine, though you did not tend it or make it grow." In other words, Jonah was so concerned to the point of wishing that he were dead about this vine that has just, withered in front of his eyes. He's so concerned about the vine. And then God, kind of goes in for the sucker punch here. Or I wouldn't say the sucker punch, I would say the knockout punch here. Where he says, Nineveh has more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and many cattle as well. Should I not be concerned about that great city? In other words, Jonah, in his pride and in his prejudice, was more concerned about this silly little vine than about an entire civilization. Jonah was closed off to compassion and understanding, whereas God was fully open to it. And so, it's just like chapter 4 of Jonah, it shows how humans, we can become totally confused and out of balance regarding our priorities and what is important about life. A vine does not mean anything, and yet it meant the whole world to Jonah. And this, I guess, this chapter just illustrates that this is why humanity. This is why people can't run the whole show. Anyways, though, ladies and gentlemen, that'll do it for my thoughts on the book of Jonah. But now I want to know, what do you think of the book of Jonah if you have read it? And of course, if you have not read the book of Jonah, what did you think of this video? Whatever you thought, leave whatever comments or thoughts you might have in the comment section below. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, if you like this video, please like it and subscribe, tell your friends about the channel. And never forget to